The empire was millions strong. There were tens of thousands of battle-hardened warriors ready to fight. At their head was the divine ruler of the land, his word absolute, his will unchallengeable. They were crushed by fewer than 200 men. In the 14th century, the Inca Empire began a meteoric expansion, conquering territory across the Andes. And by the beginning of the 16th century, the empire, which they called the Land of the Four Corners, or Tawantinsuyo, controlled much of the western coast of South America and was the largest empire in the pre-contact Americas. The Inca Empire was an absolute monarchy, headed by the divine Sapa Inca, who ruled over the territory that was divided into 4 sections, hence the Four Corners part of the name, and administrated by a complex series of administrators, nobility, and bureaucrats. There was a wide variety of peoples the Inca conquered, with over 30 different languages spoken in the empire. Keeping all of this together was a complex war machine that relied on conscripts from the conquered peoples. Any man in the empire aged 25 to 50 would be liable for conscription, and men under 25 acted as porters to carry supplies and equipment. These conscripts spent most of their time farming, but don't let that fool you, since the Inca gave basic combat training to most males in their empire. Armies would be organized into units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000, and were led by their own native officers. The exact gear used by the Inca depended on the region the men were conscripted from, with subject groups having their own fighting style they brought to the battlefield. Troops from the highlands made great use of the sling and bolas, which were 2 or 3 stones tied together by cord and could be thrown to trip up enemies. Those near coastal areas made use of spears for throwing and thrusting, and the bow was a popular weapon with the eastern lowlands. Ranged weapons could be used to soften up an enemy until it was time to close into brutal hand-to-hand combat. The Inca used clubs made from wood and maces whose heads were made from stone or metal, usually copper or bronze, and would be in a star-shaped pattern, but could also be stylized to look like animal heads. Each prong of the star would concentrate the force of the impact on a small area, so each blow would cause massive damage. Wars are not won by dying, so the Inca would wear protective helmets made from wool, cane, and occasionally metal, and wore quilted woolen body armor and quilted or wooden shields. They would be richly decorated with bright colors, feathers, and other markings with cultural and religious significance. The colorful parade of impending death numbered around 200,000 strong. So, how did fewer than 200 men beat this? Entering the picture is Francisco Pizarro. In the 1520s, he led expeditions to the western coast of South America, becoming the first Europeans to bring news of the Inca Empire. Inspired by his distant cousin Hernán Cortés, who conquered the Aztec Empire, Pizarro went to the King of Spain, ruler of the Holy Roman Empire, Charles V, directly. He was convincing enough, and both men wanted the big payday that conquering an empire would bring. So Pizarro was given the task of bringing the land south of Panama under Spanish rule. Of course, the Spanish crown would receive a 20% cut of whatever was acquired, or stolen, depending on your point of view. With this new imperative, Pizarro set out in December of 1530 for Panama, and in January the next year set sail for Colombia. His force consisted of 180 conquistadors and 37 horses, though they were joined a bit later by reinforcements, which brought his total army, meant to overwhelm the mighty Inca Empire, to a staggering 260 men. Still, he didn't get his name in the history books by being daunted by the odds, so this tiny army crawled south. They moved at a snail's pace, making first contact with the Inca in April 1532, and Pizarro would not be able to meet with Incan Emperor Atahualpa until that November. When they first met these strange men, the Inca were thoroughly unimpressed. Still, they humored the small band of newcomers, and both sides exchanged pleasantries and agreed to meet the next day in a nearby town of Cajamarca. Pizarro and his men occupied the town first and waited for Atahualpa to arrive with his bodyguard, a token force between 3,000 to 4,000, basically unarmed, along with the 80,000-man army that was camped outside. The Spanish had 168 men at the time, which included a force of cavalry and a few arquebuses and light artillery. Since he felt being outnumbered nearly 500 to 1 as good odds, Pizarro had his men hide in a nearby courtyard and waited for Atahualpa to show up, which he did in style. The Sapa Inca was held up on a litter carried by warriors and surrounded by attendants decked out in gold, silver, and precious stones that made the Spaniards salivate over their wealth. Once there, Pizarro sent an emissary to speak with Atahualpa, demanding that he submit to the Catholic Church and the authority of Charles V. He also handed him a Bible, which Atahualpa didn't understand the significance of, and the emperor threw it away scornfully. Pizarro used this as justification to attack. With the battle cry of Santiago, they leapt out of hiding and opened fire with their arquebuses as the cavalry and infantry charged. The Inca had never seen a firearm before and were stunned by the sudden thunder and puff of smoke. Even more terrifying were the half-ton beasts these invaders rode on that moved faster than any person could run. The Inca panicked, and many began to run, trampling one another as the cavalry rode them down, while the infantry, in the words of one witness, made so good an assault that in a short time most of them were put to the sword. Pizarro was in the middle of the action and drove directly for Atahualpa, who was still on his litter. He tried to pull the Inca ruler off, but was too high up to get a decent grip. Instead, he and other conquistadors began slaughtering the litter bearers holding it up. As soon as one would fall, another Inca warrior would take his place, since letting the divine Sapa Inca fall to the ground was unthinkable. Eventually, a squadron of cavalry charged the litter, and it toppled, and Atahualpa was captured. With their leader fallen, what resistance there was dissolved like a puff of smoke. When it was all said and done, around 7,000 Inca were dead, with only one Spanish casualty. Atahualpa was taken hostage, and Pizarro demanded that a room be filled with gold and silver in order for the emperor to be released. This happened, but he was accused of plotting against the Spanish, and Atahualpa was executed by strangulation. With their ruler dead, the Spanish were able to march on Cusco, the capital, unopposed, establishing Spanish control over the Inca Empire, though rebellions and guerrilla warfare would continue to plague the region for decades after. So how did fewer than 200 conquistadors obliterate an army orders of magnitude larger and topple the largest empire in the New World? Through deception, as the Incas were practically unarmed and didn't expect an ambush. During the Battle of Cajamarca, there were only a handful of arquebuses, which are slow-firing and inaccurate, but the loud bang and plume of smoke no doubt caused the Inca to freak out when they were fired. The cavalry also did their fair share to terrify the Inca. A cavalry charge is terrifying to be on the receiving end of, and that's for people who know what a horse is. The fear it generated on a population whose largest beast of burden was the llama cannot be overstated. The stone and bronze weapons the Inca used can be devastating, but it would be next to useless against the solid steel breastplates and helmets that the conquistadors wore, and their woven body armor was no match for steel swords. The Spanish also had some microscopic help. A few years before, an epidemic of diseases such as smallpox broke out, killing between 2/3 and 90% of the population. The Sapa Inca in 1528 was killed in the epidemic, and this sparked a civil war. When the Spanish arrived, Atahualpa was in control, but had not been fully able to consolidate his hold over the empire. To top it off, the Inca belief system held the Sapa Inca as sacrosanct, so when he was threatened, either on the battlefield at Cajamarca or as a hostage later, no Inca would dare do anything that could possibly threaten his life, even when it was prudent to do exactly that. This perfect storm of factors caused the mighty Inca Empire to fall to an army small enough to fit into a college lecture hall.